Welcome back to the channel, where today we're diving into the life of a man whose name echoes through the storm-riddled waters of Tampa Bay. He's known as Lieutenant Dan, a name that's become famous not only across the state of Florida, but online around the world. This guy, he's not just some guy on a boat. Joseph Malinowski, aka Lieutenant Dan, has become a modern-day folk hero. But what makes his story so compelling? Grab a seat, because today we're diving into the tale of the man, the myth, and the legend behind the nickname. So, who is this guy, and why the name Lieutenant Dan? Well, in the movie Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan is a military man who loses his legs and confronts the storm of his life literally on a shrimp boat in the middle of a hurricane. Sound familiar? That's the parallel that earned Joseph his nickname. But Joseph's journey to become Lieutenant Dan wasn't scripted. It's a real, raw life story. Flashback almost 40 years. A young Joseph Malinowski is a spirited teenager with big dreams, but his life changes overnight in a horrific scooter accident. He loses his leg, and at 16 he's already faced with a life-altering challenge that he never saw coming. But here's the thing about Joseph. He's the kind of person who won't back down, no matter how stacked the odds are against him. He fights, he adapts, and he eventually learns to live on one leg. Fast forward to the present day, and Joseph's home is the water. He lives on a 22-foot sailboat, navigating the rough seas of Tampa Bay. To him, the boat isn't just a home, it's a way of life, a place where he feels untouchable. He's been out there for a few storms now, each one worse than the last. Locals know him well, and when hurricanes start brewing in the Gulf, you'll find Joseph aboard his vessel, refusing to leave despite the warnings. And that brings us to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. For most people, hurricanes mean boarding up windows and evacuating, but not for Joseph. When Hurricane Helene slammed into Tampa, Joseph was on his boat, defiant and fearless. His decision to ride out the storm got people talking on social media, in the news, and even with local officials. Then came Hurricane Milton, and once again he stayed put, right in the storm's path. Now, here's where the internet came in. Joseph's raw courage and determination hit a chord, especially with the TikTok crowd. People couldn't believe his fearlessness, or maybe his craziness, but they loved him for it. A local TikToker, Terrence, made him famous by sharing clips of him riding out the storms. Before long, Joseph had amassed a dedicated following. The comments? They were filled with awe, admiration, and even worry for the man they now called Lieutenant Dan. Of course, every story has its shadows. Joseph's life isn't without its darker moments. He's had his fair share of brushes with the law. From heated bar fights to a confrontation that allegedly ended with him trying to set a park bench on fire, Joseph's journey hasn't been without its lows. In fact, he spent a year in prison in 2022 after an incident with a sheriff's deputy. He's the first to admit that he's had struggles and that his life has been a battle on all fronts. But here's where things take a turn. After surviving Hurricane Milton, Joseph's story reached kick streamer Adin Ross, who was so inspired by Joseph's bravery and grit that he gifted him a brand new boat. We're talking between $50,000 to $100,000. And to make it even better, Ross set him up with a streaming deal, allowing Joseph to broadcast his life, his story, and his adventures on the water. For Joseph, this was the first real shot at a fresh start. Joseph's story is woven with his deep spiritual beliefs. He said that he feels a connection to God when he's out there on the water and believes that he's meant to weather these storms. He follows spiritual leaders on TikTok who talk about destiny and divine purpose. And he truly believes that he's protected, that he's being watched over, just like Noah on his ark. To Joseph, these hurricanes aren't something to run from. They're part of his calling. Now, with a new boat, a loyal following, and a second chance, Joseph Malinowski is determined to use his story to inspire others. He's had his battles, he's had his struggles, and he's made his mistakes. But this is his moment to live, not just survive. As he put it in his own words, "You're giving me my life back." So what's next for Lieutenant Dan? With his streaming setup, he's ready to document his adventures, his storms, and his story for all who are willing to watch. So, there you have it, the real story of Lieutenant Dan, the man who's gone head-to-head with hurricanes, faced down adversity, and carved out a legend on the waters of Tampa Bay. Some call him crazy, others call him a hero, but one thing's for sure, Joseph Malinowski is a survivor. And whether he's weathering storms or finding redemption, he'll always be Lieutenant Dan, a man whose story is one for the ages. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time with more unforgettable tales.